Welcome to the Doctor's Life Podcast with Diane Ansari-Winn, MD. Dr. Diane is a coach for doctors. With her 15 years of experience as an anesthesiologist and certification as a physician development coach, Dr. Diane coaches doctors on how to live a rich life of purpose, fulfillment, freedom, and happiness both at work and at home. In this podcast, Dr. Diane brings together doctors and researchers that are experts in health, wellness, stress, and burnout, as well as doctors that have been successful in clinical practice, academics, non-clinical careers, and business to share their expertise and life experience so that you can live your own life purpose, fulfillment, freedom, and happiness. To get free access to a PDF and video of easy and proven strategies that melt stress away and keep it away, simply register at www.dianeansari-winn.com. That's www.dianeansari-winn.com. Now here is your host, Dr. Diane Ansari-Winn.
Hi, it's Dr. Diane here, and I have a quick request before we jump into the show. If you like this podcast, it would mean so much if you took just a moment to hop over to iTunes, write a review, and rate the show. That is how other people will find the show and get the same great value from it that I hope that you're getting. It just takes a few moments to click a star rating and write a quick note. Now, on to the show.
Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Doctor's Life Podcast. Today, we are talking about developing a professional identity, more specifically, helping our medical students to form a professional identity. And we're talking with an expert in this, Dr. Clay Wright. She's an MD, a cardiothoracic anesthesiologist, and an associate professor in the Department of Anesthesiology and Perioperative Medicine at MD Anderson Cancer Center. There, she's focused her clinical efforts on the perioperative care of cancer patients, specializing in the area of cardiothoracic tumors. And prior to transitioning to MD Anderson, she was a faculty member at Baylor, starting in 2007. And in addition to providing clinical care at Baylor College of Medicine, she provided 8 years of academic guidance and professional development to medical students during her service as Director of Medical Student Education in the Department of Anesthesiology and as Director of the Baylor College of Medicine Learning Community in the Undergraduate Medical Education Department. In addition, she's active in our anesthesiology physician community, and she's serving as Vice Speaker of the House of Delegates for the Texas Society of Anesthesiology, and she serves on the board of the American Society of Anesthesiologists, where she engages in advocacy efforts related to perioperative care of patients. Additionally, she's expanded her areas of interest in speaking about burnout and the role of mindfulness and reflection can play to mitigate stress and improve overall health. And actually, Dr. Wright and I had met at a conference last year called From Burnout to Brilliant, and she presented a beautiful presentation on development of medical students, professional development, and reflective writing. And so just definitely had to have her come and describe all of her amazing work to you all. Dr. Wright is married to Randall John Wright, MD, and he's a neurologist. He's been practicing for over 15 years in Houston. She's a mom. She has 2 sons, Andrew and Reed. And when she's not taking care of her family or her patients, she likes to read, work out, and she's learning to play golf. And she's an active member of the Houston community as well. Well, Dr. Wright, thank you so much for coming on the Doctor's Life Podcast. I'm really excited about our conversation today.
Thank you so much for having me on the podcast. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about, so I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, we start off the podcast, as you all know, if you listen regularly. Everyone that we've had on the podcast has an inspirational story of how they got into medicine, and I'm sure Dr. Wright is no exception. So we'd love if you could share how you got into medicine and how you came to do the work that you're doing today.
Well, I think the best way to describe and to probably start that off is my path was not always a planned and directed path. Going into the decision to go into medicine for me, and the decision to go into medicine, I think, is different for different for everyone. Mm-hmm. Oftentimes people kind of go down the path and know that this is exactly what I want to do and think that they've always wanted to go into a certain arena, into a certain, area of medicine, or even specifically or in general, just wanting to go into medicine. Mm-hmm. But for me, I didn't necessarily have the idea since I was young that I wanted to be a physician or that I wanted to be a doctor. That for me came later in life when as a college student, I knew that I wanted to do something where I could provide a service to people and where I could work with people. And I enjoyed the sciences. I enjoyed that aspect of learning and that aspect of my education. But originally I thought I wanted to go into physical therapy or work in some sort of occupational therapy. I was big into sports and I enjoyed that type of work. Mm-hmm. And so I thought that's what I wanted to do until I started working in a hospital as a college student. And we'll talk later about mentorship and the importance of mentorship. And mm-hmm. It was through finding different mentors as a college student that led me, after having many discussions, kind of led me on that path of wanting to become a physician and seeing the way that physicians can impact the lives, not only the patients, but also impact the lives of their families. And it was through that process of that job that I had in a hospital, and in particular having one mentor that made me go and make that decision to want to go into medicine.
When people are sharing their stories, they tend to mention that there is a mentor or someone in their lives that often was instrumental on their path. And as you mentioned, we'll talk about that more later. But just starting at the very beginning, when I was in medical school and I graduated in 1992, there wasn't really a curriculum about professional identity per se. You just kind of copied what the doctors did around you. Of course, since then, things have evolved in medical school education. What does it mean to have a professional identity? And why is there an emphasis in medical school these days to consciously form one?
The idea of professional identity development has come about and started as medical educators started to look at ways to teach, quote unquote, professionalism mm-hmm. to medical students. And as you mentioned, for yourself and for myself, when I was in medical school either, professionalism, those and everything that's covered in that umbrella of professionalism, be it ethical behavior, how to be professional, those things were not, the concept of professionalism was not covered in medical education. And as curriculum for medical education grew and core competencies developed, professionalism became one of them.
Right.
So as medical educators started to look at their curriculum, it was noted that in the area of medicine, the process of becoming a physician is indeed that. It's a process, and that there is a place and there is a need for physicians that are medical educators to deliberately be a part of that process. Professional identity development, I think historically has been more, nurtured and taught in a lot of other professions, but in the medical arena, it's been predominantly, like you mentioned, as part of that hidden curriculum where you pick it up, you see it, you find a physician that you want to be a role model for you or someone that's a mentor for you. And then that's how you kind of model that professionalism and how you start to develop your own professional identity. But as we kind of move along that continuum, it's important for us to be a little more deliberate about teaching students about professional identity development, to give them that awareness so that they can have that ability to process many of the things that's going through their minds and through their environment and the changes that they're going through in order to allow them to develop, to get to the point where they develop that professional identity. When you come into medicine, you come in as a person with your own ideals, your own values, and everything that was kind of given to you from those that raised you, whether it's your parents or guardians or teachers or everyone that was in your environment as a child, and as you've grown, you're coming into the medical profession with that. But as we become physicians, we have this sort of social contract with society. And the question becomes, how do we help medical students feel like physicians, act like physicians, portray themselves as physicians, and understand what that professional identity development process is for them?
It's interesting that you had mentioned that, to feel like a physician, to think like a physician, to act like a physician. And I just had a radio interview with a lay person who said that doctors, and kind of almost alluded that doctors are taught somehow, whether it's overtly or just by society, that they're on a pedestal somehow. It's been my experience that doctors tend to be actually pretty humble folks. And so when we're talking about developing a professional identity, there's the professionalism that we need to have as physicians, where we are respectful of our patients and we communicate with and we're compassionate with our patients. But at the same time, as part of our professionalism, there is the challenge of being professional without being perceived as being cold or withdrawn from our patients.
Right.
And I think doctors sometimes struggle with that, where they really want to show themselves with their patients, but there's kind of a line between warm communication and being professional. What advice do you give, or what do you guys teach the students about that? Because you don't want to be too casual, but you still want to show that your patients that you care.
Right. But that's where the art of medicine and the art of practicing medicine, I think a lot of the coldness, so to speak, that some physicians may give across, a lot of that is in that same token, a lot of the warmness that may come from one physician, or the openness that may come from another physician versus the directness that may come from another type of physician. I think, there are all these stereotypes about how different physicians are, act a certain way. Mm-hmm. And when you see a physician that's a certain type of physician and not fitting that stereotype, we're always so shocked or so surprised, right? Mm-hmm. But I think a lot of that has to do with the innate personality of the individual that's practicing medicine. And I think through the process of teaching professional identity development, I think we open the doors for that realization of how they are responding to patients. We open the doors for medical students, residents, and practicing physicians to be able to analyze and reflect on that. Because I think that's where we have this gap, so to speak, is that a lot of times people just aren't aware of how they're coming across towards their patients. Mm-hmm. If they're not coming across as warm towards their patients, or if they're not communicating effectively with their patients, or they're not showing compassion towards their patients. Sometimes you have medical students and residents that just kind of aren't aware of that character trait that they may not be displaying. And I think a lot of that is personality dependent, and it's how you come into medicine. It's not that I think they don't have the desire to do that. I think a lot of it is that they don't have the opportunity to reflect on how they are responding, or they're not giving the opportunity to discuss how they're responding, how they're communicating, how are they displaying empathy, how are they displaying patience, how are they displaying compassion. And I think we have to allow space for medical students, residents, to be able to do that. Because once they have the opportunity to have those discussions about how they are with patients and how their patients are perceiving them, then they can learn. You can't learn how to be that warm if that is not your natural personality, if that's not the place where you operate from in general. You're not going to learn how to do it on your own unless you have that help in teaching you how to do it. And that's the part of medicine that I think that goes into teaching professional identity development. That's part of that process, is helping students reflect on how they are responding and how patients are perceiving them, and getting that feedback from a mentor or from a teacher or from an attending, having that time to be able to get that feedback, and then also allowing the trainee or the medical student to have that opportunity to be able to reflect on that. And then I think we can move from the space where, we have these stereotypes of how physicians are responding and how they may seem that they're, that they may lack empathy or that they may lack humility. I think once we allow them to be able to reflect on that, we can start to close that gap a little bit more.
And that's actually one of the goals in professional or in the education around developing a professional identity, is to encourage and cultivate the integration of the professional self, their professional selves, into their lives, and vice versa. And I like what you're saying about how the idea isn't so that we're all like cookie cutter, or this is how you express compassion, pat on the shoulder, or, or nod, or, like it allows for an art, and it allows for us as physicians to be able to develop our own style, but within the guidelines of professionalism. And that can look very different depending on who's practicing and what their basic style is like.
And the goal is, that's what makes medicine so unique, is that you want individuals that have their self-authored principles and their individual standards and their own belief systems. Like we want that to be maintained, because that's what makes the practice of medicine so rich, right? Because the population of patients that we treat is so rich and diverse, and we want physicians to maintain their own individuality.
Yes.
In that same vein, we have to be able to teach medical students to be able to understand different values and external values, and understand different dynamics, and how can they meld those two dichotomies together in order to, once we are forming the product of either a resident or a practicing physician.
Yes. Let's talk some about I mentioned in the introduction that we had met while you were doing a workshop on reflective writing. Can you describe what that is and what you're doing with the students?
Right. Well, and that was something, we did a couple of years ago with medical students that were in their clinical rotations, and looking at the beginning of their mandatory clinical rotations. At each rotation, during each rotation, students at the end were responsible for completing these reflective writings. And the premise for doing that and for putting that integrating that into the curriculum for medical students was to give them the opportunity to start the reflective process, and to hopefully allow them to see what that reflective process is for them to gain an understanding of what that feels like, and ultimately for them to incorporate that into their own experiences throughout their medical education. And it was guided through with mentors and with clinical mentors. So all of our medical students were assigned a reflective writing topic about an experience during their clinical rotation, and they wrote about it, and they wrote about that experience. And the process of writing, we know, can be profoundly impactful when reflecting on new experiences in life. And that reflective writing, those reflective writing pieces, after the students had completed their writings, they discussed their writings, clinical faculty members that were also their mentors. So it allowed them to complete that reflective cycle of going through an experience, thinking about it, writing about it, and then closing that loop with someone that was more senior and more advanced than them and in the practice of medicine, so that they can have someone to discuss that process with. And we know that, and that in and of itself is part of the professional identity process, because that's how you gain your professional identity, is through your experiences and discussing with mentors and the encounters that you have with your patients and your curriculum and what are the outside expectations of the society on you. And so through reflective writing, and based on the prompts that we gave them, I think it allowed the students the opportunity to think about and to gain their own insight into their own professional identity development.
When we did the workshop, it was a really powerful work that we did in that workshop. How could this be applied beyond medical school? How could a doc in practice perhaps use reflective writing or other professional development strategies to continue to develop themselves as they move forward?
It's not easy, right? I think it's it's not something. Reflection as great as it is and as great as it sounds, it's not an easy process, because it's not easy because our minds and the pace of our life is not structured for it to be easy. And so I think just realizing that it's not easy, it's not going to be easy to do, that just realization takes the load off, I think. But ultimately, I feel that writing is the key. Talked a lot about this and at the great conference about, burnout, and writing out our thoughts and writing out our feelings is so therapeutic, and it's free, it's easy, it doesn't require much time. I'm kind of dogmatic about, I feel like the process should be a pen and a paper. We think in our mind that writing down in our phone might be the same. And I think if that's your only option, then and you have a thought and you want to get it down, go for it. There's power with sitting down and having quiet time and writing your thoughts and your feelings. And I think doing that is probably the ultimate place to get to, right? But before we can get there, I think, and before even myself, before I can get there consistently, I think we have to take advantage of the other opportunities that we have to reflect. And if it's on your walk to your office, parking your car, how many times do we park your car in the same spot and are rushing to the office and just kind of not even thinking about what's going on today, or not even thinking about where you are or what you're doing or what the impact that you're going to have on people today. And I think if we can take advantage of everyday opportunities just to think about what we're doing, think about the value that we have, I think that can be a great first step. And that's thinking about it on the front end, but I think there's also some value and importance on reflecting on our experiences. Oftentimes I feel, and looking even just in when I was more heavily into medical education, and looking at that is seeing the mind's ability to push things away and not to really think about them and not to really reflect on them. And we don't want to dwell on the negative, but we want to be able to have that time to process experiences that we may have had that may have felt uncomfortable. And so I think that's I think if you were going to start somewhere, I think it's starting with the little moments of reflection, and it's also about reflecting on and not pushing down the experiences that we may have had that may have felt uncomfortable.
That is good advice. And I love where you come from the perspective of being a very busy anesthesiologist in academics and involved in the society, also being a physician wife to a physician and having 2 kids and everything that, it always comes up when you're thinking of strategies or introducing strategies to our docs for their health and wellness. Well, how in the heck am I going to add that to my day? I've already got my pajama time at night where I'm on the EMR and I've got everything else going on. And so I love your practical approach to this very, very important
sometimes
strategy.
Sometimes it's just as easy as going out for a run in silence. My husband always sees me. He knows when I'm going out for a run and I don't have my earphones on. He's like, oh, must have been a bad day.
Must have been a day.
I'm going off for a run. Must have been a day.
That's right. Oh, wow. Well, Dr. Crystal Clay Wright, it has been an absolute pleasure to talk with you today here on the Doctor's Life podcast. Thank you so much for
Thank you. I enjoyed this. Yes, thank you.
You're welcome. Thanks, everybody, for listening to the podcast today. And until next time, hope everybody stays happy and healthy. You guys take care.
You've been listening to the Doctor's Life podcast with Diane Ansari-Winn, MD. Go to www.dianeansari-winn.com to read show notes, listen to past episodes, share your comments and show ideas, and pick up your free PDF and video of easy and proven strategies that will melt your daily stress away. That's www.dianeansari-winn.com.